The next speaker is Professor Massimo Livi Bacci, Emeritus of Demography at the University of Florence. He is member of this Academy of Youth and also of the Accademia Nazionale dei Lincei. Past president of International Union for the Scientific Study of Population, he was twice elected member of Italian Senato della Repubblica. He will speak on Europe and the migration problem. You have to work.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Rossi, and thank to the Academy of Science of Turin for the invitation, and to ALLEA for organizing this very stimulating and interesting meeting. And I think that the migration dilemma for Europe is certainly worth the attention of European academies for at least three general reasons. The first is establishing the facts that are very often distorted by the press, by the media, but not only. The media are distorting what people that are responsible or have institutional responsibilities say. It's not fault of the media, it's fault of those who disseminate falsities about the migration issues. So establishing in an authoritative way the facts about migration. Numbers, situations, trends, analysis of the characteristics of migrants, etc. This is an extremely important task. The second one is the interdisciplinary analysis of the causes and consequences of migration. It cannot be something that is left only to the ministries of the interior to decide whether immigration flow is good or bad for the society. So we need interdisciplinary analysis touching on economics, on sociology, and many other subjects, on law, migrants' rights, etc. And so this is the extremely crucial task that the academies have. And third one, I think, is providing society with a balanced assessment of the migration implications. Migration is the social trend, the social phenomenon more important in this part of the century, more important than other phenomena, demographic or social. It's really changing our society. In the last 20 years, 15% of the renewal of European societies, renewal in the sense that every society is renewed, but new people and that join that society, that are, in the case of population, are births and immigrants. So 15% of the renewal of European society has been due to migration, hence the crucial importance of the migration issue. So I think the academies have a role in this. They have to provide serious, well-founded, balanced assessment of what the situation is and the perspectives are and the implications also for legislations concerning migration. And several years ago, I was, several months ago, I was in one of the many roundtables that we have somehow, we are forced to be part of. And I was asked before the round table, can Europe sustain mass migration? Or will Europe have mass migration in the future? So I went to since the round table was in English, I wanted to clarify what the meaning of mass is. I went to my Oxford dictionary, and the Oxford dictionary says that mass, usually of people, means a large number. So Europe has had, in the last 20, 30 years, a large number of immigrants. Between 1950 and 1980, 30 years period, the population of Europe grew at relatively high speed, and there was no migration. In the period between 1980 and 2010, the population was almost stagnating, but we had 30 million net immigrants in Europe. What I mean, say net, in the sense that immigrants minus those who are departing. In the last 10 years, in spite of the economic crisis that have touched all the European countries in different ways, but in a very heavy way, the net immigration into Europe has been of the order of 13 or 14 million people. So, is this mass immigration? I don't know. I think it is a mass immigration. It's a great number of people. And what I'm going now to discuss is what is going to happen in the future, or what may happen in the next 50 years, and the implications for migration of the, of the population trends of Europe. And let me begin with demography. Population projections say that, I'm not going into details, but these are migration projections, that population projections that are somehow have a consensus of the specialists. Nobody, of course, nobody knows what's going to happen, but migration is population trends are a relatively stable social phenomenon. So projections at 20 or 30 years distance are in general relatively well-founded if you take a large area like Europe is. So it says that if no migration, no immigrants would enter Europe, and therefore Europe, all European countries kept closed doors policies, the population of Europe would decline by some 10%, which in itself is not a tragedy over 30 years if the population falls by 10%. But the decline becomes worrying when you look at the age composition of this decline, because the decline of 10% is a large decline for the population that is young or in adult age. Below the age of 70, there would be a decline of about 1/4, 25%. But there would be an increase of 60% for the population 70 years and older. So you see the unbalanced age structure would be, that is already unbalanced, very aged populations we have now, but that would increase very much in the next 30 years. So this is the real problem, not the decline, but the aging of the population as the decline proceeds. And again, another fact is that the median age of the population that cuts in half, the age that cuts in half the population, if you order the population by age, would increase by about 40 years now to close to 50 years in 2050. So a man or a woman 49 years old in 2050 may claim to be in the youngest part of the population. So these are the projections, if doors were kept closed. And this has consequences, of course. But even if the doors were not closed, and the projections, United Nations projections that I cited before, have other hypotheses, with an hypothesis of 1 million net immigrants into Europe in the next 30 years. Every year in the next 30 years, we would still have a very aging population and still have a decline of about 5% of the total population of Europe. And aging would continue almost unabated. Therefore, even a relatively robust level of immigration, less than the immigration in the last 10 years of crisis, where we had about, as I said before, 1.5 million every year of net immigrants into Europe. But even 1 million would not change very much the situation. And so these are the data. And as a preliminary facts and data for what I'm going to say now. So the main question is whether a smooth and balanced development would be compatible with a decline and aging population, such as the one that Europe would be nurturing in the coming decades, and with a steeper gradient should the doors of immigration remain closed. In 1937, about 80 years ago, more than 80 years ago, John Maynard Keynes delivered his Galton Conference before the Eugenics Society. Population dynamics was central to his discourse. I'm quoting, "An increasing population has a very important influence on the demand for capital. Not only does the demand for capital, apart from technical changes and an improved standard of life, increase more or less in proportion to population, but business expectations being based much more on present than on prospective demand, an era of increasing population tends to promote optimism, since demand will in general tend to exceed rather than fall short of what was hoped for. But in an era of declining population, the opposite is true. Demand tends to be below what was expected. Thus a pessimistic atmosphere may ensue. And although at long last pessimism may tend to correct itself through its effect on supply, the first result to prosperity of a changeover from an increasing to a declining population may be very disastrous." And these words, I think, are still behind I think may be repeated today, and I think they have still a foundation in present time. Certainly, a declining population implies a shrinking of the labor force and possibly a shrinking of GDP, of the total product of a nation. And among developed countries, a shift in the balance of power in favor of North America that is not declining, is going to increase, population increases, a change in balance of power in favor of North America as compared with Europe and Japan. From a geopolitical or geodemographic perspective, a declining population implies a loss of power and influence in the international arena. But one can legitimately argue that at the center of our worries, we should place the individual well-being with its imperfect proxy, GDP per person, for instance, rather than the power of a nation. The question has been discussed over and over in the decades following Keynes' statement. The crucial question is what the effect of demographic decline is on the growth of the product per person. The bad news is that this growth looks likely to slow because working age populations will decline more rapidly than overall populations. Yet this need not happen. Productivity growth may keep up growth in GDP per person. As labor becomes scarcer and pressure to introduce new technologies to boost workers' efficiency increases, so the productivity of labor may rise faster. Anyway, retirement ages can be lifted to increase the supply of labor even when the population is declining. So this is a consolatory type of counter-argument. Okay, population decline is aging, but increasing productivity, technology, education, investment, etc., may change the perspective. On theory, this is possible. However, we may gain a clearer view of the question with a closer look to Germany, for instance, the European powerhouse. Between 2020 and 2050, the population in Germany would decline 16% with doors closed to immigration, while the population in working age would decline 24%. So, larger increase of the population in working age. Now, let's suppose that the next 30 years, the age at retirement is increased by 10 years. Instead of being 65, grows to 75 or something like that, which is a very important increase. And let's suppose also that the activity rates in every age group, either for women and for men, would increase at the maximum possible levels. Almost 100% for men, a little bit less for the women, but somehow at the highest possible levels. Even so, the calculations show that the active population of Germany would marginally decline, even scraping the bottom of the barrel. You know, let's the old people go to work. Let's the 70 to 80 years old people work, at least one every two be at work, which is a very, very difficult achievement to get. But even so, even in this extreme perspective, the total active population in 2050 in Germany would still marginally decline, and in the meantime, it would age rapidly. So let us now assume that a slight decline of the labor force obtained, it is true, scraping the bottom of the barrel, has no influence on the average individual well-being. Let's suppose that, okay. Can the same be assumed for the process of aging? Is it possible that a 70 years old additional worker might substitute with no loss of productivity a missing 30 years old one? This is a central issue. From the point of view of mere physical efficiency, the health status of older persons has been improving rapidly. Not only survival at a given age has increased, but the same can be said of many other indicators, such as physical fitness, while the incidence of disabilities and of chronic pathologies and the like has declined. On the other hand, the gradual shift from forms of labor implying physical, muscular efforts to forms of labor requiring sophisticated intellectual abilities, typical of modern society, makes aging a lesser obstacle to economic efficiency. Technology and education are the keys to the transition, in keeping with the process of dematerialization of production and consumption. Policies and institutions, and academies perhaps, will sustain this process. So why worry about aging? The problem is notwithstanding the improved well-being of the aged, empirical studies tend to confirm the fact that individual job performance or productivity over the working life cycle is shaped like an inverted bowl. It increases in the early part of the working cycle. People learn. Is flat for most of the cycle. Once you have reached high productivity, this stays the same for a long time and declines towards the end, at the end of the life cycle. So it is a shape of like that. The form of the bowl, the length of the flat platform, the steepness and the timing of the decline varies according to a number of factors, such as the nature of the job, the physical and psychological fitness, and the cognitive abilities required, or the working environment. Most studies converge on the conclusion that young workers are significantly more productive than older workers. Of course, this disparity can be reduced with the right policies, more investment in human capital or technology, but surely it cannot be eliminated in full. There is, however, another aspect that has to be taken into account. If productivity has the form of an inverted ball, there are many other significant areas of human activities where productivity life cycle profile is heavily skewed on the left, with modal values at relatively young ages. In the hard science, the age at which the innovation or the discovery has been made and has gained to the person, man or woman, the Nobel Prize or other significant recognition, field medals or other type of international recognition, later in life in general. So you make a discovery at the age of 30 and then the Nobel Prize is given to you when you are 70 or 75 or 80 years. So if you take the age at which the discovery has been made, then the curve is a curve that is skewed on the left. And the modal age, where the frequency is highest, is between 30 and 40 years of age. So this means that productivity and innovation, particularly, technological innovation, is a factor, it's associated to younger age rather than to old age. The ratio between the 30 to 40 people who gains the recognition later on in life to those who gain the recognition for something they have done at the age of 70 or 75 is 1 to 5 or 1 to 6 or 1 to 7. So this curve is extremely skewed. But this is often true in other fields, not only sports or performing arts, where it is clear that there is a skewness in the age of people, but also among innovative entrepreneurs or initiators of successful startups. It is quite rare to have a startup initiated by an 80 years old man or woman. You do that when you are 20 or 30s. And quickness of mind, risk-taking, some homeopathic doses of arrogance and rebelliousness are often a key to success and the salt of development. Summing up, there is little doubt that the process of aging represents a trade wind unfavorable to development. The problem is that in the 21st century, the wind is blowing much stronger than in past times. The unfavorable consequences of an aging and shrinking labor force can only up to a point be counteracted by more technology, richer human capital, improved social and working environment. Moreover, the future trends we have examined follow a negative spiral that must be reversed. Generational replacement cannot be negative forever. So the obvious alternative to immigration, in order to solve this type of structural problem, is an increase in fertility, more births. I am skipping here the discussion of this. Is this possible? Well, many governments have tried that with mixed and, in general, uncertain results, depending on the condition, on the situations, on there is a maternal dowry given by the Russian government, for instance, that is very rich for those couple who have a second or a third child. And this apparently has raised fertility a little bit. And the same can be said for Germany in the last 10 years, where family policies have been strengthened, that some gain also has been achieved. Although it is uncertain whether this is a contingent factor, and like when you give money to people to throw away his old car and give a bonus to buy a new one. There is an increase, but then this bubble will continue in time. Well, the problem is that these policies are extremely expensive. They mean a transfer to the family, to the couples, of a large part of, a large share of the income, it is estimated that the cost of an additional child is about between 20 and 30% the yearly income of the family. So it's a high cost. If the government had to bear part of this cost, this would imply a few points of GDP per year. So this is extremely difficult to achieve, and the results would be uncertain. Moreover, I mean, the additional child of the policy, of the new policy, the additional child of today enters the labor force 20 years after. So even if the policy, you enact the policy today, the effects on the labor force of this policy would be felt 20 or 30 years from now. So again, we have 20 or 30 years of population decline, population aging, labor force aging, and in the case of doors close to immigration. So the fertility increase and the pro-natalist policies would, aside from the difficulties of enacting them and the cost of enacting them, would help very little. So an acceleration of immigration looks inevitable. According to OECD estimates, the gross inflow of permanent immigrants into the European Union has been comprised between 2 and 3 million in the last decade. To have a net immigration of 1.5 million per year, as it has happened in the last 20 years, means that you have an entrance of the double of triples of immigrants, because many go back. So the net gain would be 1, but the gross inflow would be 3. So this is a large number of people. And those, the last 10 years were the years of the economic recession and of its weak recovery. So if a modest amount of common sense and deductive reasoning is admitted in this sophisticated assembly, I am tempted to say that immigration in the coming 3 or 4 decades could be considerably more numerous than it has been in the recent past, in spite of the fact that the population policies, the migration policies of the European governments, almost all European governments, are tending towards restrictions, selection of immigrants. So we want less immigrants. We need immigrants, but we want less of them. So this is the schizophrenic situation of the political opinion and the public opinion. Schizophrenic because we know that we need immigrants, but we don't want them. So how do you solve this problem? I don't know. I think the Academy here have also a moral type of task to perform. So I will close my intervention by referring to the main points that the anti-immigration intellectuals, politicians in general use when they say that Europe doesn't need migration, it doesn't need mass migration, that migration is a false problem. We must better organize our autochthonous population in a more efficient way, and this will solve the problem. I think there are at least 4 arguments. The first argument: immigration is not a solution for aging. Immigrants themselves also age. Therefore, the anti-aging effect is transitory. This is true, but it's true only for a wave of immigration, of young immigrants. Then you have a wave, and then you have nothing. So those young immigrants will slowly become 30 years old, 40 years old, and then they will age. And therefore, there is no anti-aging effect. But this consideration does not apply to a continuous stream of migrants as a complement to the stream of births, or, as is often said, as substitutes for births. In this case, an immigrant can be equated to an adopted child in a family. A family adopts a child when this is in her or his infancy, while society adopts an immigrant in general when he or she is a young person. But the concept is the same. Second argument, should immigrants be substituted for births, their conspicuous number is likely to be detrimental to the material welfare and social well-being of the poorer segment of the receiving population, depressing wage levels at the lower end of the income scale and creating frictions in school, housing markets, and claims on welfare state and environmental amenities. Well, maybe, but in the absence of immigration and with a sustained population decline, the material welfare of the poor, as well as the welfare of the well-to-do, would be endangered by an economic downturn. So, again, this argument is a weak argument. Third argument, mass immigration under certain conditions may perhaps sustain aggregate growth. But it is doubtful that per capita income may be raised. This depends on the skills of the migrants, and particularly on their employability. When the skills of the immigrants do not match the requirements of the labor market or are a burden for the public purse, then they may weigh negatively on the per capita income. But even if per capita gains were to be achieved, consider the anti-immigration school, even so, the distributions of gains is likely to be lopsided, leaving many less well off. Compensation for such losses, even if theoretically possible, in fact, are never effected. Thus, while the immigrants themselves are likely to be clear beneficiaries of the move they voluntarily elected to make, the welfare gain for the receiving population is far from assured and likely to be skewed. So the idea is that even if these benefits are gained, these benefits determines more inequality, and part of the population will not gain benefits from from immigration. However, the counter argument is, if admitting a large number of immigrants sustains the economy, what could counter this would help those very programs aimed at reducing inequality. So you don't reduce inequality with a shrinking economy. You can reduce inequality with a growing economy. And if immigration accelerates the economy or prevents the decline of the economy, well, this is an argument in favor of immigration rather than against. Fourth and last argument. Continued mass immigration threatens the cultural cohesion, undermines mutual regard, weakens cooperation, and renders unpopular redistributive efforts because taxpayers think the beneficiaries will be people who are diverse and only recently arrived in the country. A sour consequence of all this is the fact that immigration jeopardizes the feelings of national solidarity, which in turn seems to drive Western societies in a dangerously rightward direction. So, again, the argument, immigration undermines social cohesion. So this is the main argument. So the counter argument could be that it's true that inordinate and excessive immigration may jeopardize the cultural cohesion and the social compact of any country. But closing the doors and causing the economy and the individual well-being to shrink may imperil cohesion for different reasons. Responsible for this, in this case, cannot be the migrant, because we do not accept migrants, but we will find another scapegoat to elect as responsible for the decline of the society. It is always very easy to find a scapegoat. In this case, it will not be the migrant, will be some other person, some other categories of people. It is not my intention to continue the debate and discuss the merits and the arguments of those who fear that mass immigration may be detrimental to social cohesion, increase inequality, produce nativist excesses, nurtures xenophobia, or even disrupts the European Union. In order to discuss these issues, it would be necessary to evaluate the policies for admission, integration, citizenship, followed by each country, and this is not the object of this address, although it might be the object of ALLEA, of the European Academy, to go into this. It would also be necessary to take into account the fact that anti-immigration feelings increase in periods of depression and decrease in periods of expansion. And we are in a period of at least stagnation, if not depression. A final short answer to the question posed by the title of the round table that I attended: does Europe need mass immigration? The answer is yes, if the time horizon is that of a generation, 20 or 30 years. And if by mass immigration we mean a net immigration of 1 or 2 million per year, an impressive stream, but not a tsunami.
Thank you, Massimo, for your critical and propositive intervention. Who will speak? Pose questions? Oppositions? Nobody?
Don't tell me that they have convinced everybody.
Please.
Yes, perhaps I could add one other aspect that the academies might contribute to in this discussion, which is the historical perspective, because the phenomenon of mass migration, or the dilemma as it is described here, is not new, but it's actually perhaps the most stable feature of human history, that of being on migration. So it's rather the other way around. It's the situation of being stable in one place that is rather unusual. It developed in the Neolithic, in a certain, so for the entire portion of the history of our species before the Neolithic, we were only on movement, and beginning with Neolithic, it began this kind of opposition between being migrants and being sedentary. But at least on 2 occasions, I think, in our common history, we have seen that the migration really changes the entire, I would say, order of our world, and in the long run for the better. One mass migration that I can think of is the one that took place at the end of the Bronze Age, and that created the Iron Age, so it's called Sea Peoples, from the Aegean to the palatial culture of the Near East, and that in fact created a better world. A better world in the sense, the invention of money, of international trade, of all this was in fact the result of the Iron Age. And the second big migration is what in German is called Völkerwanderung, and interestingly enough, in the Romance countries, barbarian invasions, right, which points to this different cultural memory of the same event, which in fact created, let's say, generally speaking, the national states, or what is now taken to be the European division in national states. So in both cases, these are, to a certain extent, technological innovations that took place with mass migration. So while probably the next couple of decades may be difficult, in the long run, of course, there will be a positive, quote-unquote, positive result for the evolution of humankind from this phenomenon. Yeah.
Okay, I take your intervention as a compliment to my speech, yes, it is like that. We could find other instances. The only problem is that we don't know which is the cause and which is the consequence. Again, so this is a very delicate point. But if we I recall what our colleague Cavalli Sforza argued, that innovation and the discovery of agriculture was due not to original new developments, but to the migration of people who had the technique, knew the technique, and migrated from the southeast of the Mediterranean basin to the northwest part of Europe, and with them they brought the new techniques and the new technologies. So this again, in other cases migration has been disruptive. If we take the case of the population of the Americas, in the 16th century, the decline, the steep decline of the populations, indigenous populations, were due to the arrival of Eurasian people. So again, there are many different cases, but I by and large agree with you. The only problem again is distinguish cause and consequences.
I thank you, first of all, for your explanation and presentation. I personally feel, and please don't take it as a critique, it's just my personal feeling, that there has been a sort of underestimation, maybe, of the immigrants, all non-rational factors that go around this phenomenon. Because when you say that we need them, but not, with limitations in terms of numbers. As an immigrant, I personally feel that it automatically goes to underestimate what we feel as people, because when you enter in a land that is not yours, and you know that you are there because the continent is benefiting from your presence as you're increasing the number of young people, it sort of underestimates the personal and emotional feeling. So I don't know. I'm just asking you at this point, is there any sort of approach you have, or, and I don't know, an advice, a suggestion you could give to people who feel this very darkly and, I don't know, personally, I mean? Thank you.
Okay. Is that a question, or is a... It's more a comment, your personal comment.
Big ones?
It's better without microphone than with microphone.
Is it without that?
I think so, because the microphone is...
I just, from my personal experience, I see that adults don't really look at what you feel because it's not rational, it does not really give concrete data, numbers. But I think it's important because I feel it.
Okay.
So I was just wondering what you think about this.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think it's self-evident, the question. Other questions?
Continue.
Thank you so much for tackling this problem, but I have a question regarding the...
I must come close to you because the...
No. I have a question regarding
aging doesn't help with hearing, first point. And second, the microphone does this.
I have hearing issues too, so it's not an age problem. So Europe has been experiencing migration years and years ago before this huge wave that has been recent. But and since it's inevitable, there's this problem that was still there before, which is the problem of integration. So if Europe is accepting huge numbers of, let's say, potential taxpayers in the future or technicians or whatever, but they're still failing to integrate them socially and in workplace, do you think that the problem of integration is being tackled, or have Europe learned from the problems of the previous waves of migration that are still here, still didn't contribute or still didn't integrate neither socially nor in workplaces?
I think that immigration is not, let's put it this way. We must invest on immigrants. So immigrants, of course, may boost the economy, but they have this effect if the hosting country invests on the immigrants. Is not free of charge, the immigration. I mean, we have, when we talk about integration, integration costs money and costs intelligence, and we have to do that. We have to invest in schools, in housing, in language, in fostering the relations between the new arrivals and the autochthon peoples. And I think it's a very complex issue. And, but if we do not invest, I mean, if the country that receives immigrants does not invest on them, then migration may be a failure. So I think I perfectly agree with you. It's not an immigration like the immigration in the Americas or North America, that immigrants went there was no help, no nothing, but there was a law enacted in the 60s that if an immigrant decided to cultivate a share of a parcel, that parcel would become his property. So this was a kind of indirect investment that was made, you know? So I think it's extremely important. This part is important. I talked about in general way, but I do agree with you with that. We do not invest enough in money, but not only money, human resources in the integration process.
Others? Other questions? No. Thank you. Thank you again.